The relationship between Islamic thought and the theory of evolution. How often do we pause to consider this fascinating intersection? Today, we're diving into what leading books and articles say about this dialogue between faith and science. From groundbreaking studies to timeless classics, this conversation will uncover insights that may reshape your perspective. Now let's delve into a dramatized dialogue between Layla and Omar as they guide us through this captivating discussion.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be exploring a topic that you might not hear every day.
Yeah.
The relationship between Islamic thought and the theory of evolution.
Right.
We've got some excerpts from a chapter called Islam and Darwin, the reception of the evolution theory in the Islamic tradition. And let me tell you, you might be surprised to learn just how long and complex the Islamic world's history is when it comes to engaging with evolutionary ideas.
Yeah, it's a fascinating history, and it goes back centuries before Darwin himself.
Okay, so you're telling me this wasn't just a conversation that popped up when Darwin published his book in the 1850s?
Right.
I think that's what most people assume.
It is a common misconception.
Yeah.
Long before Darwin, Muslim scholars were grappling with concepts that sound very similar to evolution. Take the Brethren of Purity, for example.
Okay.
They were a group of Islamic philosophers back in the 10th century, and they discussed this hierarchy of beings progressing towards perfection.
Hold on, the 10th century, that's way before Darwin.
Right.
We're talking about the Islamic Golden Age here.
Exactly.
It was known for intellectual advancement, so I guess this fits right in.
It really highlights that ideas we associate with modern science were being explored within a completely different intellectual framework.
All right, so what happened when Darwin's theories actually made it to the Muslim world?
Oh.
How did they react?
Well, Darwin's work was translated into languages like Arabic and Persian and entered the Muslim world in the late 19th century.
Okay.
And much like what happened in the West, reactions were mixed.
Okay.
Some scholars embraced Darwin's theories, others rejected them entirely,
Yeah.
and some were somewhere in between.
So there wasn't one single unified response. Let's unpack those different reactions.
Sure.
Because our source material mentions three major viewpoints.
You got it.
Okay.
The text points out three main ways Muslims responded to Darwin.
Okay.
You have the rejectionists, who believed Darwin's theory just couldn't be reconciled with Islam.
Okay.
They saw evolution as a direct challenge to their faith and held on to the Quran's account of creation.
So if you're approaching the Quran from a literal interpretation standpoint,
Right.
it makes sense that evolution would seem incompatible with your beliefs?
Exactly.
For our listener, can you explain how the rejectionists would have justified their stance?
Well, they would likely point to passages in the Quran that describe God's creation of the world and humanity,
Okay.
emphasizing the distinct and special creation of Adam. They'd argue that evolution reduces humans to just another animal,
Right.
denying the spiritual significance of their creation.
Okay, that's the rejectionist perspective.
Right.
What about the second group?
The second group is called the harmonizers.
Okay.
They tried to find common ground between evolution and Islamic teachings. To them, evolution could still be part of God's plan.
Okay.
They saw it as a divinely guided process that unfolded over time.
So instead of seeing science and faith as conflicting forces,
Right.
the harmonizers try to reconcile them.
Exactly.
But wouldn't some argue there's inherent tension in trying to seek scientific truth while also adhering to revealed religious doctrines? How would the harmonizers navigate that?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
They would likely emphasize that God's power and wisdom are demonstrated through the very process of evolution.
Okay.
They might argue that the Quran, while containing spiritual truths, wasn't intended to be a scientific textbook.
Okay.
In their view, the two could coexist with science explaining the physical mechanisms of creation and religion providing the spiritual meaning behind it.
Okay, so for the listener at home who might be more familiar with the conflict narrative between science and religion, this offers a different way of looking at things.
Yeah.
What about that third group?
Okay.
The text calls them modernists, right?
That's right. The modernists.
Okay.
They're the ones who fully embraced evolution as a scientific fact. And they were willing to reinterpret Islamic teachings through the lens of this new scientific discovery.
Wow.
For them, accepting evolution actually enhanced their understanding of the natural world.
Okay.
rather than diminishing their faith.
That's a big step, reinterpreting religious teachings based on new scientific findings.
Yeah.
Doesn't that raise some red flags for people who are concerned about undermining the authority of Scripture?
Mm-hmm.
How would a modernist address that concern?
They would likely say that the Quran's core message of faith and submission to God remains valid.
Okay.
However, they'd argue that our understanding of certain verses might need to evolve as our scientific knowledge progresses.
Interesting.
They'd emphasize the importance of reason and critical thinking within the Islamic tradition.
So we have three very distinct responses: outright rejection, seeking harmony, and reinterpreting religious texts.
Right.
But I'm guessing the historical context also plays a role in how these ideas were received, especially considering the changes happening in the Muslim world at the time.
You can't ignore the impact of European colonialism during this period.
Yeah.
It added a whole other layer of complexity to how Muslims responded to Darwin.
So for the listener,
Sure.
paint a picture of what was happening at that time.
Okay.
How did colonialism factor into all of this?
Well, imagine you're living in a Muslim-majority country under European rule.
Okay.
Science and technology are being used to assert Western dominance.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a sense that traditional values are under threat.
So it's not just about science anymore. It's about power dynamics and cultural identity.
Exactly.
So for some Muslims,
Yeah.
embracing evolution was seen as a way to align with progress and potentially gain more autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
It was a way to show they were just as capable as their colonizers. So science becomes a tool for asserting agency in the face of colonial power.
Yes.
But for others, rejecting evolution became a form of resistance. It was a way to defend their Islamic identity and push back against Western influence.
Right.
They saw it as a way of saying, our beliefs are valid, our knowledge systems are valuable, and we won't be forced to conform.
Exactly.
Wow. So you have these competing forces at play.
Yeah.
On the one hand, there's the desire to engage with modern science and assert oneself on a global stage. And on the other hand, there's the need to protect tradition and resist cultural assimilation.
Exactly.
And that tension is still very much alive today, even though the context has changed.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to the present day.
Okay.
This whole debate hasn't exactly disappeared, has it?
Not at all. The conversation about Islam and evolution is still ongoing.
Okay.
And you see a similar range of viewpoints in the Muslim world today.
So let's fast forward to the 21st century.
Okay.
And explore how these debates continue to unfold.
Right.
What are some of the contemporary examples that illustrate this?
Well, on one end of the spectrum, you have Muslim-majority countries where evolution is taught in schools as part of the science curriculum.
Okay.
They see no inherent conflict between scientific knowledge and religious belief. But on the other end, you have countries that have removed evolution from their textbooks entirely, reflecting a more conservative interpretation.
I remember you mentioned some specific examples in your notes.
Yes?
Can you share those with our listeners so they can get a real sense of how this plays out in the real world?
Sure.
Okay.
One example that caused quite a stir was Turkey's decision in 2017 to remove evolution from high school textbooks. This was under President Erdogan's administration.
Okay.
And sparked a lot of debate.
Yeah.
Critics argued it was a step backward for science education in the country,
Right.
while supporters defended it as upholding Islamic values.
So clearly this isn't just an abstract intellectual discussion. It has very real implications for education policy and how future generations understand the world. What about places where evolution is being taught? Are there any interesting developments there?
Absolutely. In countries like Egypt and Indonesia, you have scholars who are actively promoting a deeper understanding of evolution within an Islamic framework. They're doing some fascinating work.
Okay.
Publishing books, giving lectures, engaging in interfaith dialogues.
Wow.
All with the goal of showing that accepting scientific evidence doesn't have to mean abandoning one's faith.
So what we're seeing here is not this simplistic Islam versus science narrative that you often hear in the media. It's much more nuanced than that.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It's crucial to recognize the diversity of viewpoints within the Islamic tradition.
Okay.
Just like there's no single Christian or Hindu perspective on evolution.
Right.
There's no one Islamic view either.
And that's such an important point for our listeners to grasp.
Exactly.
But I think this whole discussion raises a bigger question. We've been focusing on how Muslims have responded to a particular scientific theory. But this deep dive has me thinking about how knowledge itself evolves over time.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And it raises important questions about the very nature of knowledge and how we approach different ways of knowing.
Exactly. If science is constantly evolving, constantly being refined, and sometimes even overturned as new evidence emerges,
Right.
how do we approach religious texts?
Wow.
Can our understanding of them also evolve alongside scientific discoveries?
Now, that's a profound question.
Yeah.
And it's one that deserves careful consideration.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Yeah.
And it's a question that has implications not just for Islam, but for all religious traditions grappling with the relationship between faith and reason in the modern world. And it's a question that has implications not just for Islam, but for all religious traditions grappling with the relationship between faith and reason in the modern world.
It's a reminder that these aren't fixed, unchanging categories, right? They've been in conversation with each other for centuries, shaping and reshaping how we understand the world.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that the Islamic tradition offers a really rich example of how those conversations can take place in diverse and nuanced ways. It's not just a black and white debate.
You know, as you're talking, I'm remembering something from the source material about those early Muslim scholars.
Yeah.
You're exploring ideas that seem to almost foreshadow evolution, right? What were some of those specific ideas, and how do they connect to what Darwin would later propose?
Yes, it's amazing to see those parallels between those early thinkers and what would eventually become Darwinian theory. Remember, we talked about the brotherhood of purity. Well, they weren't just talking about a hierarchy of beings. They were actually describing a process of transformation and development over time.
So they were already thinking about how life forms might change and evolve. What kind of language did they use to describe this?
They believed that the mineral realm gradually gave rise to plants, then animals, and finally humans, with each stage representing a higher level of perfection. They described this progression as a kind of unfolding or unveiling of divine wisdom in the natural world.
Now, for someone listening who's only familiar with Darwin's theory of natural selection, this might sound pretty different.
Right.
So how would you explain the key distinctions between these early Islamic ideas and what Darwin proposed?
Well, the Brotherhood of Purity weren't talking about random mutations or survival of the fittest. Their view was more teleological, meaning they believed that there was a purpose and direction to this process of development with humans as the ultimate goal. Darwin, on the other hand, focused on the mechanisms of how species change over time through natural processes without any predetermined endpoint.
It's fascinating how different cultures and time periods can approach similar questions with such different frameworks and assumptions.
Absolutely. It really underscores the interconnectedness of human thought across cultures and time periods, and how ideas can build upon each other in unexpected ways.
I'm also curious about the role of interpretation here. We've talked about different ways of reading the Quran, but did specific passages become focal points in this whole debate over evolution?
Yeah.
Are there certain verses that people kept coming back to?
Oh, there are definitely some key verses that sparked a lot of discussion. For example, in Surah Nisa, verse 1, it talks about God creating humans from a single soul.
Okay.
Some interpreted this as support for the idea of a common ancestor, suggesting that all humans are connected through a shared lineage.
So you have one verse that's open to multiple interpretations depending on your perspective.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about how scientific discoveries can challenge us to reconsider our understanding of religious texts. Did any other verses come up in this debate?
Another verse that was often cited is from Surah Ar-Rum, verse 27. It is he who originates creation, then reproduces it, and it is easier for him. Some scholars interpreted this as referring to the continuous creation and development of life forms, suggesting a process that might align with evolutionary ideas.
So even within the Quran itself, you have these different threads that people can pull on to support their viewpoints. I imagine these debates weren't just happening among scholars, though. Did they spill over into broader society?
You're absolutely right. This wasn't just an intellectual exercise happening in ivory towers. It had real-world implications impacting education politics, and even social interactions in some Muslim-majority countries. The teaching of evolution in schools became a major point of contention, reflecting deeper societal tensions about modernization, the role of religious authority, and how to navigate the relationship between science and faith in public life.
So for our listener who might be thinking, okay, this is all interesting, but why should I care? What are some of the broader implications of this debate? Why does it matter beyond the specific context of Islam and evolution?
Well, it touches on a fundamental question that we all grapple with. How do we make sense of the world around us? Science offers one way of knowing based on observation, experimentation, and the search for empirical evidence. Religion offers another way, often rooted in faith revelation and the search for meaning and purpose. And throughout history, these two realms have often been seen as being at odds with each other.
So this isn't just about Islam, it's about how different knowledge systems interact, sometimes clashing, sometimes complementing each other.
Exactly. And in a world where science is constantly pushing the boundaries of our understanding and where religious beliefs continue to hold deep significance for billions of people, learning how to navigate these complexities is essential.
What are some of the challenges and opportunities you see in navigating these issues in the 21st century?
One major challenge is the spread of misinformation and oversimplification. The internet has become this breeding ground for false claims and conspiracy theories, often presented in a way that preys on people's fears and biases. So it's more important than ever to be critical consumers of information, to check sources, to be aware of our own biases, and to engage with diverse perspectives.
It sounds like you're advocating for a more nuanced approach, one that recognizes the complexities and avoids easy answers.
Exactly. You need to move beyond the us versus them mentality that so often dominates these discussions. It's not about choosing sides, but rather engaging in respectful dialogue and recognizing the validity of different ways of knowing.
What about the role of education? How can we equip young people with the tools they need to understand these complex issues?
Well, science education is obviously crucial, not just for teaching the facts of evolution, but for instilling a scientific mindset. Critical thinking, the importance of evidence, and the ability to adapt one's understanding in light of new information. But religious literacy is equally important.
I love that you said that. It's not enough to just teach science in a vacuum. We need to understand where people are coming from, the historical and cultural contexts that shape their beliefs.
Absolutely. This involves teaching about the diversity of religious beliefs and interpretations, as well as the complex historical and cultural factors that have shaped those beliefs. It's about fostering empathy and understanding across different worldviews.
So instead of portraying this as a battle between science and religion, we need to recognize that these are different but potentially complementary ways of engaging with the world.
Precisely, science seeks to understand the how of the natural world, while religion often grapples with the why, with questions of meaning, purpose, and morality, and both are essential for navigating the complexities of human existence.
And those why questions are just as relevant today as they were centuries ago, if not more so.
Absolutely. In a world facing unprecedented challenges like climate change, technological disruption, and social inequality, we need both scientific knowledge and ethical wisdom to chart a sustainable and just future.
It's a tall order, but I'm hopeful I see people, especially young people, who are hungry for this kind of nuanced conversation. They're tired of the simplistic narratives and polarized debates.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I think platforms like the Deep Dive have a vital role to play in facilitating those conversations, providing the information and context people need to engage in thoughtful and respectful dialogue.
I completely agree. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We started with 10th century Islamic philosophers and ended up talking about the future of our planet. It's incredible how one scientific theory can spark such wide-ranging discussions. Is there anything else in the source material that really stood out to you? Anything you think our listeners should keep in mind?
One thing that really struck me was the emphasis on the importance of context. Remember, Muslim responses to Darwin were deeply intertwined with the political and social realities of their time, particularly the experience of colonialism. This reminds us that scientific ideas don't exist in a vacuum. They're always filtered through our cultural lenses and personal experiences, shaping how we interpret and apply them.
That's such an important point. So often we talk about science as this objective, neutral pursuit of truth.
Yeah.
But the reality is much more complex.
Exactly. And that's something we need to be aware of both when we're evaluating scientific claims and when we're engaging with people from different cultural backgrounds. We all bring our own perspectives and biases to the table, and recognizing that is the first step towards genuine understanding.
So what you're advocating for is a healthy dose of humility and open-mindedness when approaching these complex issues. I like that.
Humility is key. It's a reminder that none of us have all the answers, and that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey we undertake together. Humility is key. It's a reminder that none of us have all the answers, and that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey we undertake together.
Absolutely. It's about embracing that intellectual curiosity and that sense of wonder about the world. And speaking of wonder, I think it's time to wrap up our incredible journey through the intersection of Islam and evolution.
Okay.
We've covered so much ground today, from ancient philosophers to modern-day debates.
It has been a fascinating exploration, hasn't it? And hopefully for our listener, it's been a chance to see this topic in a whole new light.
I hope so too. So as we reach the end of our deep dive, what are the key takeaways you want our listener to walk away with? What are those big aha moments that we hope will stick with them?
Well, first and foremost, we've debunked this idea of a single monolithic Islamic view on evolution. We've seen the whole spectrum of responses from those who completely reject it to those who fully embrace it, with plenty of nuanced perspectives in between.
And we can't forget the historical context, right? Colonialism, the drive for modernization, the interplay of religious and scientific authority, all of these factors shaped how Muslims engaged with Darwin's ideas, and they continue to influence these conversations today.
It reminds us that science is never purely objective. It's always embedded within a social, cultural, and political landscape, and understanding those influences is crucial for understanding how scientific ideas are received, interpreted, and applied.
Right. It's about seeing the bigger picture, the forces that shape our understanding of the world. And this isn't just ancient history. These debates are very much alive and well in the 21st century, both within the Muslim world and globally, whether we're talking about what's taught in schools, how we interpret religious texts, or even how we approach cutting-edge issues like bioethics and genetic engineering. Those questions about the relationship between science and faith continue to shape our world.
They do. And they demand our attention. They demand that we bring our critical thinking skills to the table, that we engage with different perspectives, and that we're willing to have those tough conversations in a respectful and constructive way.
I couldn't agree more. And speaking of engaging with different perspectives, I think it's time for our signature deep dive challenge. We've explored some fascinating ideas here, but we've really only scratched the surface.
That's the beauty of it. We've hopefully sparked some curiosity and opened up some new avenues for exploration.
Exactly. So for our listener, here's your challenge. We've talked about how scientific theories are constantly evolving, being refined, challenged, sometimes even completely overturned as new evidence comes to light.
Right.
So this begs the question, how might our understanding of religious texts evolve alongside those scientific advancements? Do these two realms of knowledge have to be in conflict, or can they actually enrich and inform each other in a way that deepens our understanding of both?
It's a big question, and there are no easy answers, but that's what makes it so compelling. Take some time to ponder it, do some research, engage with diverse voices, and most importantly, keep an open mind. You might be surprised by what you discover.
And hey, if you stumble upon any particularly mind-blowing insights, we'd love to hear about them. Share your thoughts with us on social media. We're always eager to continue the conversation and learn from our listeners.
Until next time, keep diving deep.